Let's review navigation and workflows in Scroll Cinema. So projects in Scroll Cinema can get very large very quickly. As you can see here, I'm going to go through the various tracks that we have in A Modern Ghost. There are quite a lot of them, and there are quite a lot of keyframes and clips as well. So we have various mechanisms in place to keep your projects organized in Scroll Cinema. And so right now, I'm going to go over a few of those navigation items and organizational tips. So very first thing is if we're over the timeline window or the timeline tab, if you hover over the track labels and you scroll up and down, that will allow you to scroll easily without having to click and drag the scroll bar over here. If you scroll up and down while your pointer is hovered over the clip window, then you will zoom in and out. So that's for navigating the timeline view. You'll see up here that in the hierarchy, when we have lots of different nodes, it becomes important to start organizing things into groups. So here, for example, I've organized the main part of A Modern Ghost into a part A, and I'm moving part A right here. This is the transform. I'm moving all of these items together at once until it makes sense to go into a transition. And even here, I have the second part here in A2. So we have a group A, and underneath it, we have a group B or a group A2. And when we finish moving group A1, we start moving group A2 to keep things organized, and then we move into the transition group, and we move all of these things together at once. And within that, we have further groups to house all of the clouds on the left and the right, like so. And we use that paradigm throughout the rest of the piece as well. For example, when we get to this area with the character, we'll be putting the character and their background into a group and then moving the whole group. And the same with the other ones as well. An important point is that all of the artwork is named with numbers. This is more of a convention than a strict rule. But I personally like to previously or before I start placing a scrollie, I generally storyboard it and then get an idea of where everything is going to go. And whenever I export assets, I name things in the order that they come. Usually with a 00, usually with 3 digits, starting with 000, so that I have enough space to make sure everything comes out in order in file systems, and so I can put things where they need to be very easily. Because otherwise, if you start out with just like 01 or with just 2 digits in the beginning, right? As soon as you hit the number 100 and you have 3 digits now, things start going out of order. So that's just a convention I like to do. In terms of workflows as well, an important point is that the system scales pretty well. So if at a certain point you realize that, oh, I should really put these things into a group, you can just, for example, highlight these 2 elements that, oh, I kind of want to move these together now, right? So we're going to parent them into a group. So I clicked the group node and I clicked the parent option here. And I put both of those together. And we're going to say moving box. And now we can move both of these together, right? And we can even animate them together without having to necessarily disrupt the rest of the flow that we had going. Oh. And there's another thing that I just did. We have the option to undo. So I just did Command Z, which undoes the previous action. and Command Shift Z will redo the action, as is common in creative software. So that's just what I did there, and we're now going to animate this. And so in that way, we can change the structure and such of the hierarchy as we develop our pieces. So oftentimes when you put things into a group, it's better if you can zero things out. So for example, here, if I have a while I nodded nearly napping and suddenly there came a tapping, and if we put these into a group, you'll notice that the group itself is at position 0, 0, which means that it is at the beginning of the piece right up here, whereas our nodes are down here at these positions. So something I often like to do, and it's not entirely necessary, but I think it's helpful, if you can do it, to zero out the positions of the nodes when you put them into a group, and then move the group instead. So here our group is now up here, and so let's move the whole group down to where we want it to be. All right, and so now these two nodes, they are relative to the position of the group in the general area of where you want the nodes to be, rather than them being the group being at 0, 0 and the nodes being very far off in a different place. So if you have the chance to reorganize your nodes and want to keep things clean, I advise doing that, though not strictly necessary. Another thing is that as projects get much bigger, we have the ability to create folders for tracks as well. So you'll see that in the Modern Ghost, we have folders for resetting nodes, as well as respective folders for part A, the transition, part B, etc., etc. You can also create further nested folders if you'd like, if that is useful. For example, here I'm going to put the love seat into a track folder, and if you scroll horizontally inside of the clip window, that will allow you to see any other elements that might not be immediately apparent there. I'm just going to go ahead and undo those changes with my Command Z. We also have the ability to copy and paste. So we don't have the shortcuts menu up here available yet, but if you just come here and do Command C or Command V, or rather Command C or Control Z, depending on whether you're on Windows or Mac, and then you paste, it will create a new node. Important to note here is that groups have some special behavior. If you create a node if you create a node when you have a group selected, it will automatically parent the node to the bottom of that group. So I'm going to add a text node, for example, here. You'll see that when I added that text node, I had the moving box group selected, and it added the content here as a child of that group. So I'll just move it down here so it can be with the other elements. You'll see it moves along with them as well. If you have a node selected already, and then you create a new node either through copying and pasting or selecting a new one here in the node selection area, it will automatically set that new node as a sibling of the one you just created. So that's something to leverage while you are creating your pieces. You can, of course, drag and drop things around in the hierarchy. That is something that you should make use of as much as you can to keep yourself organized. And we also have the ability to give custom names. So, for example, the text nodes, they have by default the name of the content that's inside them. Here is the content. If at any time it makes sense, you can come and double click here to give the node a custom name. And that will allow you to keep it a bit more organized as well, if need be. You can also modify the name by going over to here. Custom name from input. So those are two ways of naming things. Of course, you can also name things inside of the project window. I typically like to keep things organized into at least an artwork folder, and generally I'll even have nested folders inside of there to make sure that I'm keeping everything straight. It's also good to put your reels and other assets into corresponding folders just to keep yourself organized in that sense as well. Here's some additional workflow tips when it comes to working with clips and keyframes in the timeline view. So something else that we can do is copy and paste keyframes from one track to the next. So if we don't have any opacity keyframes on the Made with Scroll Cinema text, for example, and we want to just copy the behavior from the previous credits acknowledgement, we can just copy the keyframes from the one track and select the second track and paste them in like so. And there we have that working. We can also paste from multiple tracks to multiple tracks. So if we have all of these selected, for example, and we copy and then paste, you'll see that we saw those 8 keyframes come over and get pasted starting from the position of the scrubber. We can also copy and paste from disparate track types as long as the types match. So if we try to paste, for example, or copy from the opacity track and paste onto the position track, we'll receive an error that we can't do that because opacity keyframes don't map onto position keyframes, right? But if we have, for example, the 4 keyframes from this transform track selected, and then select 2 keyframes or what have you from a different track, and then we go somewhere else and select some other track types in the same order that we copied the tracks, or in the same order that of the appearance of the other 2 track types, and we paste, we'll be able to paste those transform and opacity keyframes from one group to the other. We also have the ability to select and move large amounts of keyframes and tracks, or rather keyframes and clips, using these selection tools. So this button will select all of the assets that that precede the position of the scrubber, and this one will select all of the assets that follow the position of the scrubber. You can also lock that selection to, for example, all of the keyframes and clips underneath of this group by having a group selected. And we also have this button here to determine whether or not we should also select configuration markers. So if we deselect that, then select, it'll only select all of the keyframes and clips underneath of a particular group. If you have a particular track selected, it will only select all of the keyframes and tracks that are within that particular track, or keyframes and clips that are within that particular track. And we have 2 ways of setting keyframes and clips in bulk. So if we press this set button here, the second one, this will transpose all of the keyframes to the position of the scrubber, maintaining all of their relationships. That one is very useful for refactoring or editing sequences. For example, inserting a section in the middle of a sequence. If you decide after it's already been placed that it would be good to extend that sequence a bit. The other one, the set regular button, that will set all of the keyframes to that exact position without transposing them. So if we take, for example, these 3 keyframes that are at different times and we set them, they'll all just go right to the position of the scrubber.